Hello everyone, and welcome back to our channel. Today, we're diving into one of the most epic stories ever told, a story of freedom, faith, and divine intervention. Let's travel back in time to witness the incredible journey of the Israelites as they escaped centuries of slavery in Egypt. Imagine this, an entire nation, once bound in chains, now walking free. They weren't just a crowd of refugees, they were God's chosen people, stepping out into a new destiny, but their path wasn't easy. It led them straight into the vast, unforgiving wilderness. How would they find their way? How would they survive? The answer is found in Exodus chapter 13. By day the Lord went ahead of them in a pillar of cloud to guide them on their way, and by night in a pillar of fire to give them light, so that they could travel by day or night. Think about the sheer wonder of that. A swirling column of cloud, a divine GPS shielding them from the scorching sun. And when darkness fell, a blazing pillar of fire, a celestial beacon cutting through the blackness, warming them against the desert chill. This wasn't just a sign, it was God's tangible presence, walking with them every single step. Through blinding sandstorms and over rocky terrain, they marched. You can almost hear it. The cries of tired children, the whispered prayers of mothers, the determined tramp of warriors' feet. It was a journey of immense hardship, but they were never alone. That pillar, that constant visible reminder of God's promise, moved when they moved and stopped when they stopped. It was a personal, intimate guide for an entire nation. But their greatest test was yet to come. The pillar led them to the shores of the Red Sea. Suddenly, they were trapped. Unclimbable mountains hemmed them in on one side, and the vast, churning sea lay before them. Then a cloud of dust on the horizon, growing larger and larger. The terrifying sound of thundering hooves and rattling chariots. Pharaoh's army, the most powerful military force on earth, was coming for them, bent on revenge. Panic erupted. Fear, cold and sharp, gripped their hearts. They cried out to Moses, "Was it because there were no graves in Egypt that you brought us to the desert to die?" Their newfound freedom felt like a cruel joke, a short-lived dream about to end in a massacre. From a human perspective, it was hopeless. Utterly and completely hopeless. This is the moment where faith is forged. Standing between the terrified people and the charging army, Moses raised his voice, not in despair, but in divine confidence. "Do not be afraid," he declared. "Stand firm, and you will see the deliverance the Lord will bring you today. The Lord will fight for you. You need only to be still." Then the pillar of cloud, their guide, moved. It shifted from in front of them to behind them, becoming a barrier, a divine shield between the Israelites and the Egyptians. It plunged the Egyptian army into darkness and confusion while casting light upon the path of the Israelites. And then, the moment that has echoed through history. As Moses stretched his hand out over the sea, a mighty east wind began to howl. All through the night it blew, pushing the water, carving a path where none existed. The waters split, piling up like liquid walls on their left and on their right. A dry path emerged in the heart of the sea. Can you fathom the courage it took to take that first step? To walk between two towering walls of water with the seabed dry beneath their feet. An entire nation, men, women, children and livestock, walked through the sea. And among them, a young man named Joshua, watching, learning, and witnessing the power of his God firsthand. Once the last Israelite was safely on the other side, Moses stretched out his hand again. As the sun rose, the walls of water crashed down. The sea returned to its full force, swallowing Pharaoh's chariots, his horsemen, and his entire army. The mighty force that had enslaved them for generations was gone, washed away in an instant. On that distant shore, standing in the morning light, the Israelites were truly free. They saw the awesome power of the Lord and put their trust in him. This wasn't just a military victory, it was a profound spiritual rescue. It was a story that would be told for thousands of years, a testament that even when you are trapped, with the sea before you and an army behind you, God can make a way where there is no way. Thank you so much for joining me on this incredible journey today. If this story moved you, please hit that like button and subscribe for more content that explores these powerful narratives. Friends, have you ever felt trapped? I mean, truly backed into a corner with nowhere to go. Maybe it's a situation at work, a struggle in your family, or just a heavy weight on your heart. You look one way, and there's a mountain of problems. You look another, and there's an ocean of uncertainty. And behind you, you can hear the rumble of your past mistakes or fears catching up. If that sounds familiar, then you know exactly how the Israelites felt, standing at the edge of the Red Sea. Just imagine it. After 430 years of brutal slavery in Egypt, they were finally free. This wasn't just a small group, it was an entire nation on the move. Millions of men, women and children leaving behind the only home they had ever known, stepping out into a vast, unforgiving wilderness. They had no map, no GPS, no five-star hotels booked along the way. All they had was a promise from God and a very unusual guide. The Bible tells us in Exodus chapter 13, "By day the Lord went ahead of them in a pillar of cloud to guide them on their way, and by night in a pillar of fire to give them light, so that they could travel by day or night." Think about how incredible that is. When the sun was scorching the desert sand, a cloud appeared, providing shade, comfort and direction. It was a visible, tangible sign that God was with them, leading them. And when darkness fell, that same pillar transformed into a blazing fire, pushing back the shadows, providing warmth and lighting their path. It was a constant, 24/7 reminder. You are not alone. I am here. Follow me. This wasn't just a magical special effect. It was deeply personal. For every mother comforting a crying child, for every old man leaning on his staff, for every warrior nervously scanning the horizon, that pillar was a beacon of hope. It was God himself, condescending to walk with his people in a way they could see and understand. He didn't just point the way from a distance, he journeyed with them every step of the way. He was their guide, their protector, their comforter. But then the ultimate test arrived. They reached the shores of the Red Sea, a massive body of water blocking their path. And just as they began to set up camp, a terrifying report came in. Pharaoh had changed his mind. Consumed by rage and regret, he had mustered his entire army, his best chariots, his fiercest soldiers, and was thundering down on them, determined to drag them back into slavery. The panic that must have swept through the camp is hard to imagine. They were trapped. On one side, impassable mountains. In front of them, the deep, churning sea, and behind them, the deadliest army on the planet, closing in fast. Their newfound freedom felt like a cruel joke. Their hope turned to terror. They cried out to Moses, "Was it because there were no graves in Egypt that you brought us to the desert to die? What have you done to us by bringing us out of Egypt?" It's a very human reaction, isn't it? When the pressure is on, how quickly we can forget God's past faithfulness. They had seen the 10 plagues. They had walked out of Egypt with its wealth. They were literally following a pillar of cloud and fire. Yet, in this moment of crisis, their fear was louder than their faith. But Moses, their leader, stood firm. His response in this moment of chaos is one of the most powerful declarations of faith in all of Scripture. He tells the terrified people, "Do not be afraid. Stand firm, and you will see the deliverance the Lord will bring you today. The Egyptians you see today, you will never see again. The Lord will fight for you. You need only to be still." Be still. In the middle of pure terror, with an army bearing down on them, the instruction was to be still and trust that God was about to act. This is a lesson for all of us. When we're in our own Red Sea moments, our first instinct is to panic, to run, to try and fix it ourselves. But sometimes, the most powerful thing we can do is to be still and let God fight for us. Then God gives Moses a strange command. Tell the Israelites to move on. Move on where? Into the sea. It made no logical sense, but faith often requires us to take a step into the illogical. And notice that pillar of cloud, their guide, now moves. It goes from being in front of them to behind them, positioning itself between the Israelites and the Egyptian army. It became a wall of darkness to their enemies, but it continued to give light to God's people. God was not just their guide, he was now their rear guard, their defender. As the people stepped forward in faith, Moses stretched out his hand over the sea. And all that night, the Bible says, a strong east wind blew, and the waters divided. The seafloor became dry land. Can you picture it? Walls of water towering on their left and on their right, a pathway carved right through the heart of the impossible. An entire nation walked through the sea on dry ground. The children who were crying in fear just hours before were now walking through a miracle, their eyes wide with wonder. Among them was a young man, a warrior named Joshua, who was watching, learning, and seeing the power of his God firsthand. When the last Israelite had safely reached the other side, the Egyptian army, blinded by their arrogance, charged into the same path. But God told Moses to stretch out his hand again. And as the morning light broke, the walls of water came crashing down. The entire army of Pharaoh, his chariots, his horsemen, his pride, was swallowed by the sea. The threat was gone. Not just defeated, but completely obliterated. On the far shore, the Israelites looked back and saw the bodies of their enemies washed up on the sand. The thing they had feared most was no more. What does this incredible story mean for you and me today? It means that the God who guided with a pillar of cloud and fire is the same God who guides us today. His presence might not be a visible cloud, but his Spirit is with us, leading us through his word and through the stillness of prayer. It means that the God who parted the Red Sea is the same God who can make a way for you when you feel trapped. The problem that looks like an impassable mountain or an uncrossable sea is no match for his power. Your Red Sea might be a financial debt, a broken relationship, a diagnosis, or an addiction, but the command is the same. Do not be afraid. Stand firm, be still, and watch the deliverance of the Lord. He will fight for you. He will make a way where there seems to be no way. The very thing that you fear, the Egyptians chasing you down, can be completely drowned and washed away by his grace and power. You only need to trust him and take that next step of faith, even if it feels like you're stepping into the water. A promise that no matter how dire your situation looks, you are never truly trapped when God is on your side. He is your guide, your defender, and your deliverer. Thank you so much for joining me today and reflecting on this powerful story. The ancient nation of Israel knew this feeling all too well. For 400 years, they were slaves in Egypt. Their backs were bent under the lash, their hands raw from building cities for a foreign king. They cried out to God, generation after generation, praying for a deliverer. And then he came. Through Moses, God sent plague after plague upon Egypt, breaking the will of the mighty Pharaoh. Finally, the chains fell. Israel was free. Imagine that first breath of freedom, the dust of Goshen, their home for centuries, kicked up by thousands of sandals. They weren't just a crowd of refugees. They were a nation on the move, walking out of bondage and into a promise. But this was no simple journey. This was the wilderness, a vast, unforgiving expanse of sand and rock. How could they possibly navigate it? How could they survive? They didn't have a map, they didn't have a compass, they had something far better. Exodus 13 tells us, By day, the Lord went ahead of them in a pillar of cloud to guide them on their way, and by night in a pillar of fire to give them light. Think about that. A swirling column of cloud, a divine sign in the sky, leading them step by step. It was their shade from the scorching sun. And when darkness fell, that same pillar ignited, a blazing torch against the cold desert night, a constant, visible reminder. I am with you. You are not alone. God was leading them, but not by the shortest route. He led them toward the Red Sea, and that's when the terror returned. From the horizon, a cloud of dust billowed, growing larger and larger. The thunder wasn't from the sky. It was the sound of 600 of Pharaoh's best chariots, plus his entire army thundering toward them. Pharaoh had changed his mind. He wanted his slaves back. The Israelites looked one way and saw the impassable mountains. They looked ahead and saw the vast, uncrossable sea. They looked behind and saw the fury of the most powerful army on earth. They were trapped. The freedom they had tasted for only a few days felt like a cruel joke. Their joy turned to panic. They cried out to Moses, "Was it because there were no graves in Egypt that you brought us to the desert to die?" It's a very human reaction, isn't it? When the pressure is on, our faith can evaporate like a mirage. We see the army, we see the sea, and we forget about the pillar of cloud and fire. We forget the God who just shattered an empire to set us free. But Moses stood firm. His response in that moment is one of the most powerful declarations of faith in all of Scripture. He told the terrified people, "Do not be afraid. Stand firm, and you will see the deliverance the Lord will bring you today. The Egyptians you see today, you will never see again. The Lord will fight for you. You need only to be still." Imagine the courage it took to say that, to be still when every instinct screams to run, to panic, to do something. But Moses' instruction was to trust, to be quiet and watch God work. And then the incredible happened. That pillar of cloud, which had been leading them, moved. It went from in front of them to behind them, placing itself directly between the camp of Israel and the advancing Egyptian army. To the Israelites, it continued to be a source of light. But to the Egyptians, it became a pillar of thick darkness. It was a divine barrier. God had drawn a line in the sand. Then God commanded Moses, "Raise your staff and stretch out your hand over the sea to divide the water so that the Israelites can go through the sea on dry ground." Moses obeyed. He stretched his hand out over the water, and all through that night, a strong east wind blew. It didn't just push the water back. The Bible says it divided the waters. The sea floor became dry land, and on either side, the water stood up like two massive liquid walls. Can you even picture it? A pathway carved through the very heart of the sea. The Israelites, who moments before were convinced they were going to die, were now walking on dry ground, with walls of water towering over them on their left and on their right. They walked through the deep. They were walking through an impossibility. Among them was a young man, a warrior in training, whose name was Joshua. He was seeing firsthand the power of his God. He was learning a lesson he would carry with him for the rest of his life. With God, nothing is impossible. As the last Israelite stepped onto the far shore, the Egyptian army, blinded by rage and arrogance, charged into the same sea path. They saw a way through, but they didn't recognize it was a path God had made for his people, not for their enemies. As morning dawned, God gave the command to Moses, "Stretch out your hand over the sea, so that the waters may flow back over the Egyptians and their chariots and horsemen." Moses stretched out his hand, and the walls of water collapsed. The sea returned to its full depth. The entire army of Pharaoh, the chariots, the horsemen, the pride of Egypt, was swallowed by the sea. Not one of them survived. When the Israelites saw the mighty power the Lord had displayed against the Egyptians, the Bible says they feared the Lord and put their trust in him. Their panic was replaced with awe. Their fear was transformed into faith. They had not only been saved, they had witnessed a miracle that would be told for thousands of years. They had walked through their impossible situation on a path that only God could create. The story of the Red Sea isn't just an ancient tale, it's a timeless reminder for you and for me. We all face our own Red Seas, situations that seem impossible. A health diagnosis, a financial crisis, a broken relationship, a future that feels uncertain and terrifying. We see the army of our problems thundering behind us, and the sea of impossibility right in front. In those moments, it's so easy to panic, to let fear take over. But God's message to us is the same one He gave to Israel. Do not be afraid, be still, and watch me work. He is the God who makes a way where there is no way. He is the God who parts the waters. He may not part a literal sea for you, but He can create a path through your trial, a solution you never could have imagined. Your job is not to figure out how to part the sea. Your job is to trust the one who holds the oceans in His hands. So whatever Red Sea you're facing today, remember the pillar of cloud and fire. Remember the dry ground. Remember that the same God who fought for Israel will fight for you. Have you ever wondered what it takes to become a truly great leader? We often see the end result, the victories, the commands, the legacy. But what about the beginning, the hidden years of preparation? Today, let's journey back in time. Not to the famous battles of Joshua, but to the quiet, formative years that shaped him into the man who would lead a nation. Before Joshua ever commanded an army, before he brought down the walls of Jericho, he had a much simpler, yet profoundly important role. The Bible tells us he was Moses' servant, his assistant. Think about that for a moment. In Exodus 24, when God calls Moses up Mount Sinai, the verse says, "And Moses arose, and his servant Joshua." Joshua was right there by his side. Imagine the scene. Moses is about to enter the very presence of God, a cloud of glory so intense that no one else dared approach. But Joshua goes with him, part of the way up that holy mountain. While the elders of Israel worshipped from a distance and then went back down to the camp, Joshua waited. He waited for 40 days and 40 nights. He didn't have the grand face-to-face encounter that Moses did, but he stayed in the vicinity of God's awesome power. He chose proximity to God's presence over the comfort of the camp below. This wasn't a one-time thing. This was the pattern of Joshua's life. He wasn't just Moses' assistant in a practical sense. He was his apprentice in faith. He was the one who held the door of the tent of meeting, the sacred space where Moses spoke with God as a man speaks to his friend. When Moses would leave the tent to return to the camp, the scripture gives us a fascinating detail. But his young assistant, Joshua son of Nun, would not leave the tent. Let that sink in. While everyone else went about their day, Joshua lingered. He stayed in the atmosphere of worship, in the place where heaven had just touched earth. He wasn't seeking a title or a position. He wasn't trying to climb a career ladder. He was seeking the presence of God. He was captivated by holiness. He was learning that true strength, true wisdom doesn't come from human ambition, but from closeness to the Almighty. Think about the lessons he was absorbing, not through lectures, but through observation and devotion. He saw Moses' humility. He witnessed the weight of leadership, the burden of interceding for a rebellious people. He saw firsthand that leading God's people wasn't about strategy or charisma alone. It was about being utterly dependent on God. When Moses ascended Sinai, surrounded by thunder, lightning, and the sound of a trumpet, Joshua was there. He wasn't afraid. He was learning. He was learning that the same God of terrifying power was also a God of intimate friendship. He was learning that leadership begins long before you're ever given a command. It begins in the quiet moments of service. It begins with carrying another person's cloak. It begins with holding a tent door open. It begins with a heart that would rather wait in the shadow of God's glory than be the center of attention in the world's spotlight. This is a powerful lesson for all of us. We live in a culture that celebrates the destination, but often despises the journey. We want the platform without the preparation. We want the influence without the integrity that's forged in hidden places. Joshua's early life teaches us a different way. It shows us that the most important work we'll ever do is the work nobody sees. It's the character we build in obscurity. It's the faithfulness we show in small tasks. It's the time we spend simply waiting on God, content to be in His presence, long after everyone else has gone home. In Numbers 11 we get another glimpse. When two men, Eldad and Medad, begin prophesying in the camp, Joshua, in his youthful zeal and loyalty to Moses, rushes to tell him, "My lord Moses, stop them." He was protective of Moses' unique authority, but Moses' response is incredible. "Are you jealous for my sake? I wish that all the Lord's people were prophets and that the Lord would put His Spirit on them." Even in this, Joshua was learning. He was learning from a leader who wasn't possessive of his power, but longed to see God's Spirit poured out on everyone. He was learning that true leadership empowers others. It doesn't hoard authority. Every interaction, every moment of service was a lesson. So what was Joshua doing all those years? He was learning obedience. He was cultivating patience. He was developing a deep, unshakable reverence for God. He wasn't just waiting for his turn, he was being transformed. The man who would one day say, "As for me and my house, we will serve the Lord," first learned to serve by carrying water, by pitching tents, and by waiting quietly, faithfully at the door of his master and at the feet of his God. Before you can lead armies, you have to learn to follow. Before you can command thousands, you have to learn to serve one. And before you can stand before the people, you must first learn to wait in the presence of God. Joshua's story reminds us that our greatest calling is not to a position, but to a person, to God Himself. And it's in the seeking of His presence that He prepares us for everything else He has in store. Thank you so much for joining me today to explore this incredible part of Joshua's story. If this message resonated with you, please give this video a thumbs up and consider subscribing to the channel for more content like this. Today we're diving deep into one of the most powerful and cinematic stories in all of Scripture, the Exodus. We're going to journey alongside the Israelites, from their liberation in Egypt to the breathtaking miracle at the Red Sea, and we'll see how these epic events were shaping a future leader, a young man named Joshua. Let's set the scene. For 400 years, the children of Israel have been enslaved in Egypt. Their backs are breaking under the weight of bricks and mortar, their spirits crushed by the whips of taskmasters, but their cries have reached the ears of God. He remembers the promise He made to their forefathers, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Deliverance is coming. In Exodus chapter 12, the final plague descends. It's the night of the Passover. Every Israelite family, following God's specific command, has sacrificed a lamb and painted its blood on their doorposts. It's a sign of faith, a symbol of protection. As the angel of death passes through the land of Egypt, it passes over the homes marked by the blood. In the houses of the Egyptians there is a great cry, but in the homes of the Israelites there is safety, there is life, there is the dawn of freedom. Imagine the scene that follows. Pharaoh, his heart finally broken, commands them to leave. Go, and so they do, not as fugitives slinking away in the night, but as a triumphant nation marching out. Exodus 12 tells us they didn't leave empty-handed. They asked their Egyptian neighbors for silver and gold, and they received it. 4 centuries of stolen wages are repaid in a single night. This isn't just an escape, it's a divine reversal. The oppressed are now vindicated, the enslaved are now enriched. They walk out with their heads held high, their chains broken, their tears finally beginning to dry. A nation is born in a day, and they are not alone on this journey. Exodus chapter 13 gives us this incredible image. And the Lord went before them by day in a pillar of cloud to lead them along the way, and by night in a pillar of fire to give them light, that they might travel by day and by night. Think about that for a moment. This isn't just a distant, abstract God. This is God as their personal guide, their ever-present companion. When the sun beats down on the harsh desert, He is their shade, a pillar of cloud. When darkness falls and fear creeps in, He is their light, a blazing pillar of fire. He is leading the way, step by step. He is with them. And among this massive crowd, a young man named Joshua is watching. He's seeing all of this unfold. He's witnessing the tangible, visible presence of God leading His people. This isn't a story he's being told. It's the reality he is living. But the journey to the promised land is not a straight line. God intentionally leads them toward the Red Sea. From a human perspective, this seems like a terrible strategic mistake. Behind them, Pharaoh's heart has hardened once again. He regrets letting his entire workforce go. He rallies his army, his best chariots, his elite soldiers, and thunders after them. Now picture the Israelites. They are trapped. In front of them, the vast, impassable Red Sea. Behind them, the dust cloud of the most powerful army on earth, getting closer and closer. The sounds of war echo in the distance. The freedom they just tasted feels like it's about to be snatched away. Fear grips them. They cry out to Moses, "Was it because there were no graves in Egypt that you brought us to the desert to die?" It's a moment of sheer panic. Their newfound faith is immediately put to the ultimate test. But Moses stands firm. His response in Exodus 14 is one of the greatest declarations of faith in the entire Bible. He tells the people, "Do not be afraid, stand firm, and you will see the deliverance the Lord will bring you today. The Lord will fight for you. You need only to be still. Be still in the face of an oncoming army, in the face of a watery grave. Be still and watch God work." This is a profound lesson, not just for them, but for us. Sometimes, the most powerful thing we can do is to stop our striving, silence our panic, and trust that God is in control. And then the miracle happens. The pillar of cloud, which had been leading them, moves behind them. It becomes a barrier of darkness to the Egyptians, but it continues to give light to the Israelites. God Himself stands between His people and their enemies. Then the Lord commands Moses, "Stretch out your hand over the sea." Moses obeys. He stretches out his hand holding the simple wooden rod that has become a symbol of God's power. And all through the night, a strong east wind blows. The waters of the Red Sea begin to divide. The sea piles up into liquid walls on their left and on their right. A path of dry ground appears where there was once only water. Can you imagine the awe, the sheer disbelief? Joshua, now a young warrior, steps onto that seabed. He feels the dry ground beneath his feet. He looks up at the towering walls of water, held back by an invisible hand. He walks through the heart of the sea, surrounded by the raw, untamed power of God. This isn't a theoretical concept of God's might. It's a sensory experience. He is walking through a miracle. The entire nation of Israel, men, women, and children, follows him. They are walking on a highway of salvation created just for them. When the last Israelite is safely across, the Egyptians charge into the same path. But their chariots get stuck. Their wheels get clogged in the mud. God is fighting for Israel. Then, as morning dawns, God tells Moses, "Stretch out your hand over the sea again." Moses obeys. The walls of water collapse. The entire Egyptian army is consumed by the sea. The might of Pharaoh, the empire that held them captive for centuries, is broken and drowned in an instant. As the Israelites stand on the other side, they look back and see the bodies of their enemies washed up on the shore. The threat is gone. They are truly, completely, undeniably free. And what is their response? They sing. Exodus chapter 15 records the song of Moses and Miriam. It's a spontaneous explosion of praise and worship. I will sing to the Lord, for he has triumphed gloriously. The horse and his rider he has thrown into the sea. The Lord is my strength and my song, and he has become my salvation. Hope is reborn. Faith is solidified. They have not only been saved, they have witnessed the absolute sovereignty and power of their God. And Joshua was there for all of it. He saw the slavery, he saw the plagues, he saw the pillar of fire, he walked on the dry seabed, and he sang the song of victory. God wasn't just rescuing a nation, he was training a leader. Every miracle, every challenge, every victory was a lesson, shaping Joshua for the even greater tasks that lay ahead, for the battles he would one day lead, and for the land he would help them conquer. The journey has just begun, but the foundation of faith has been laid in the most spectacular way possible. Thank you so much for joining me on this journey through Exodus today. I hope this story encourages you and reminds you of the incredible power and faithfulness of God. Have you ever wondered what it takes to become a great leader? We often look at the end result, the victories, the influence, the legacy, but we rarely see the humble beginnings, the years of quiet preparation that forge a leader's character. Today, let's pull back the curtain on one of the greatest leaders in history, not at the height of his power, but right at the start of his journey. We're talking about Joshua. When we think of Joshua, we think of the commander who led Israel into the promised land, the man who saw the walls of Jericho fall. But that's not where his story began. Long before he was a general, he was a servant. The Bible introduces him simply as Joshua, son of Nun, Moses' aide. His first role wasn't one of command, but of service. In Exodus chapter 24, we see a powerful moment. God calls Moses up Mount Sinai to receive the 10 Commandments. It's a terrifying and awesome event. The mountain is covered in a cloud, fire, and smoke. The people are warned not to even touch its base. But look at verse 13. So Moses arose with his assistant Joshua, and Moses went up to the mountain of God. While the elders and the people waited at the bottom, Joshua went part of the way up with Moses. He wasn't called to the very top, but he was chosen to go further than anyone else. He was the one trusted to accompany his leader into the very presence of God. This wasn't a position of glory, it was a position of proximity, of quiet support. He was learning to be comfortable in the presence of the holy. This experience must have profoundly shaped him. He saw firsthand what it meant to commune with God. He felt the weight and wonder of that divine encounter, even from a distance. While others were far below, Joshua was in the green room of God's throne, learning the protocol of heaven, not through a manual, but through observation and proximity to Moses. This is our first clue. Great leadership isn't always about being in the spotlight. Sometimes it's about being the quiet, trusted presence just outside of it, absorbing, learning, and serving. Now let's fast forward to Exodus chapter 33. This is one of the most revealing passages about Joshua's character. After the golden calf incident, there's a distance between God and the people. Moses sets up a special tent, the tent of meeting, outside the camp, where he goes to speak with God face to face as a man speaks with his friend. It's an incredible picture of intimacy with the Creator. When Moses finished and returned to the camp, what happened at the tent? Verse 11 gives us the answer, and it's a detail we could easily miss. It says, "But his young assistant, Joshua son of Nun, would not depart from the tent." Think about that. Moses leaves, the divine meeting is over, the pillar of cloud is gone, but Joshua stays. Everyone else has gone back to their daily lives, their routines, their own tents. But Joshua remains. He didn't want to miss a single drop of God's presence. He lingered where God had been. Why did he stay? The text doesn't explicitly say, But we can imagine. Perhaps he was guarding the sacred space. Perhaps he was meditating on what he had just witnessed. Or perhaps he was just so in awe of God's presence that he couldn't bring himself to leave. He was hungry for more. He wasn't just doing a job. His service was an act of devotion. He wasn't just serving Moses. He was ultimately serving the God that Moses served. This is the heart of the matter. Joshua learned that true leadership, the kind that can guide a nation and part a river, begins with obedience and a desperate hunger for God's presence. It's not about having all the answers or the most charismatic personality. It's about a willingness to serve, to wait, and to linger where God is, even when everyone else has moved on. His promotion didn't come from networking or self-promotion. It came from the secret place, from the hours spent in quiet devotion in the tent of meeting. In our own lives, we often want to skip the tent of meeting part. We want the leadership position without the long years of faithful service. We want the public victory without the private discipline. But Joshua's story teaches us a different way. It shows us that the foundation of a great calling is built in the quiet moments of obedience when no one is watching. It's built when you stay a little longer in prayer, when you serve faithfully in a small role, when you honor the leaders God has placed over you. Joshua didn't see his role as an assistant as a stepping stone. He saw it as a sacred trust. He was all in, right where he was. He wasn't looking over Moses' shoulder, trying to figure out how to get his job. He was watching Moses back, supporting him, and most importantly, watching God. He learned that to lead God's people, you must first learn to follow God himself, intimately and obediently. So what tent is God calling you to linger in today? Maybe it's a small ministry at your church. Maybe it's serving your family with a joyful heart. Maybe it's simply the discipline of spending time alone with God when the world is pulling you in a million other directions. Don't despise these humble beginnings. Don't rush out of the tent. This is where character is forged. This is where God prepares his leaders. Like Joshua, if we are faithful in the small, unseen moments of service and devotion, God will entrust us with more than we could ever imagine. The path to leading the nation began with a simple choice: to not depart from the tent. Thank you so much for joining me today. I hope this look at Joshua's early life has encouraged you. If it has, please give this video a thumbs up and consider subscribing to the channel for more content like this. It's a lesson that is just as relevant for us today as it was for the Israelites wandering in the desert thousands of years ago. Picture this. The people of Israel have just escaped slavery in Egypt. They've witnessed incredible miracles, the parting of the Red Sea, water from a rock. But they are far from their destination. They're tired, they're vulnerable, and they're in a place called Rephidim. And it's here in this state of exhaustion and uncertainty that they face their first major military threat: the Amalekites' attack. This wasn't a random skirmish. The Amalekites were known for their ruthlessness, and they chose to attack Israel from the rear, preying on the weakest and most exhausted among them. It was a cowardly and brutal assault. In this moment of crisis, a leader's true character is revealed, and Moses steps up with a brilliant two-part strategy. He turns to his trusted commander, a young and capable man named Joshua, and says, "Choose some of our men and go out to fight the Amalekites." This is the first part of the plan: practical, earthly action. Joshua is to gather the warriors and meet the enemy head-on. They can't just wish the problem away. They have to confront it with courage and strength. Joshua, full of faith and obedience, doesn't hesitate. He prepares for battle. But Moses knows that human strength alone isn't enough. He understands that their ultimate victory depends on a higher power. So, he declares the second part of his plan. "Tomorrow, I will stand on top of the hill with the staff of God in my hands." This staff wasn't just any stick. It was the very same staff Moses used to part the Red Sea and perform other miracles. It was a symbol of God's power and authority. By holding it up, Moses wasn't performing a magic trick. He was engaging in a powerful act of intercession. He was positioning himself as a link between the battle raging in the valley below and the source of all strength in the heavens above. So the next day, the scene is set. Down in the valley, Joshua and his men are locked in a fierce life-or-death struggle against the Amalekites. Swords clash, men shout, and the fate of a nation hangs in the balance. Up on the hill, overlooking the entire battlefield, stands Moses. He raises his hands, holding the staff of God high. And then something incredible happens. As long as Moses held up his hands, the Israelites were winning. They pushed forward, their strength renewed, their attacks effective. Joshua and his men were prevailing against a formidable foe. But imagine standing for hours with your arms held high. It's exhausting. Inevitably, Moses' arms grew tired and they began to fall. The moment his hands lowered, the tide of the battle turned dramatically. Down in the valley, the Israelites began to falter. The Amalekites rallied, pushing them back. The connection between Moses' action on the hill and the outcome of the battle in the valley was undeniable and immediate. Victory wasn't just about Joshua's military skill. It was directly linked to Moses' spiritual posture of prayer and dependence on God. This cycle repeated itself. When Moses' hands were up, Israel prevailed. When they dropped, Amalek prevailed. Moses was experiencing a profound truth in real time. The spiritual battle is just as real, if not more so, than the physical one. But he was only human. He couldn't keep his arms up forever on his own. This is where the story takes a beautiful turn and teaches us one of its most important lessons. Seeing Moses struggling, his two companions, his brother Aaron and a man named Hur, didn't just stand by and watch. They didn't just shout encouragement from the sidelines. They took action. They saw a need and they met it. They found a stone for Moses to sit on, providing him with some stability and rest. Then they did something even more significant. Aaron stood on one side of Moses and Hur stood on the other, and together they physically held up his tired arms. One man on the left, one on the right, they became his support system. They literally shouldered the burden with him. Think about the power of that image. The leader, the great prophet Moses, was not too proud to accept help, and his friends, Aaron and Hur, were not too busy or too self-important to offer it. They understood that this was a team effort. Moses' role was to intercede, Joshua's role was to fight, and their role was to support the intercessor. Each part was essential for the final victory. Because of their help, Moses' hands remained steady until sunset, and because his hands were steady, Joshua and his army down in the valley were able to completely overwhelm the Amalekites and win a decisive victory. It was a total triumph, made possible by a combination of factors: courageous action on the battlefield, fervent prayer on the hilltop, and selfless community supporting the prayer. So what does this ancient story have to say to us today? It's a powerful metaphor for the challenges we face in our own lives. We all have Amalekites to fight, whether they are struggles with our health, challenges in our careers, difficulties in our relationships, or internal battles with fear and doubt. The story teaches us that victory requires a Joshua strategy and a Moses strategy. We need to be like Joshua, taking practical steps, working hard, and facing our problems with courage. We can't be passive. We have to go out and fight. If you're looking for a job, you need to send out resumes. If you want to get healthier, you need to exercise and eat right. Faith requires action. But at the same time, we must be like Moses, recognizing that our own efforts are not enough. We need to go to the hilltop in prayer, lifting our situation up to God and depending on His strength, not just our own. The battle is often won or lost in the spiritual realm before it ever plays out in the physical. Consistent prayer, like Moses holding up the staff, connects us to the source of true power. And perhaps most importantly, we can't do it alone. We all need an Aaron and Hur in our lives. We need friends, family, and a community that will come alongside us when we get tired. People who will hold up our arms when we feel like we can't go on. And just as critically, we need to be an Aaron or a Hur for others. Who in your life is growing weary? Who is fighting a tough battle and needs someone to come alongside them and offer support, encouragement, or practical help? Victory is a community project. It's the synergy of faith and action, of personal dependence on God and mutual support for one another. When we fight our battles like Joshua, pray like Moses, and support each other like Aaron and Hur, we position ourselves to see God bring the victory. So I want to encourage you today to think about your own battles. Are you engaging both in the valley and on the hilltop? And are you looking for opportunities to be that vital support for someone else? This story reminds us that we are stronger together and that with God, no enemy is too great. Imagine standing at the edge of a dream, a promise you've waited for your entire life. It's right there, just across the border. You can almost taste it. This was the reality for the Israelites, camped at the doorstep of the Promised Land. After generations of wandering, of hoping, of praying, they were finally here. The air itself must have buzzed with anticipation. In this pivotal moment, God speaks to Moses, not with a command to charge forward, but with a different instruction. In the book of Numbers, chapter 13, we read God's words, "Send some men to explore the land of Canaan, which I am giving to the Israelites." It wasn't a test of God's promise, but a chance for the people to see for themselves the goodness that awaited them. So Moses does just that. He chooses 12 men, one leader from each of the 12 tribes. These weren't just any men. They were leaders, respected figures, the best of the best. Among them were two names that would echo through history, Joshua from the tribe of Ephraim and Caleb from the tribe of Judah. These 12 men were given a mission, to be the eyes and ears for a whole nation. Their task was to go deep into this land of promise and bring back a report. What was the land like? Was it fertile or barren? Were the people strong or weak? Were the cities fortified or open? They were to bring back not just words, but tangible proof of what they found. The fate of a nation, the fulfillment of a generations-old promise, rested on the report these 12 men would bring back. They set out, a small group stepping into the unknown. They traveled the length and breadth of Canaan, from the desert of Zin in the south to Rehob in the north. They saw the rolling hills, the green valleys, and the flowing rivers. The land was everything they had been promised, and more. It was a land literally flowing with milk and honey, a poetic way of saying it was incredibly fertile and abundant. As proof of this incredible abundance, they came to the valley of Eshcol. There, they found a single cluster of grapes so massive, so heavy, that it took 2 men to carry it on a pole between them. Can you picture that? A cluster of grapes so large it required 2 strong men to transport it. They also gathered pomegranates and figs, symbols of life and prosperity. This wasn't just a good land. It was a land of supernatural blessing, but they saw something else too. They saw the inhabitants of the land. They saw that the people were powerful, and they saw the cities, great and fortified with walls that seemed to stretch to the sky. And in the land, particularly near Hebron, they saw giants, descendants of Anak. Fear began to creep into the hearts of some of the spies. The promise was real, but so were the obstacles. The sheer size of the fruit was matched by the sheer size of the challenge. After 40 days, the spies returned to the camp at Kadesh. The entire nation gathered, eager to hear the news. The air was thick with expectation. They brought out the giant cluster of grapes, the pomegranates, and the figs. A gasp must have gone through the crowd. The proof was undeniable. God's promise was true. The land was incredible. Caleb, filled with faith, stepped forward to speak. He quieted the murmuring crowd and declared, "We should go up and take possession of the land, for we can certainly do it." His voice rang with confidence. He saw the giants, he saw the walls, but he saw a bigger God. He remembered the promise wasn't just about a piece of land, it was about God's power to give it to them. But then the other 10 spies spoke. They started by agreeing, yes, the land flows with milk and honey, and here is its fruit. But then came the but. It's the but that so often kills our dreams. But, they said, the people who live there are powerful, and the cities are walled and very large. We even saw descendants of Anak there. We seemed like grasshoppers in our own eyes, and we looked the same to them. Their words were like a virus of fear, spreading instantly through the camp. They painted a picture of an impossible task. They magnified the giants and minimized their God. They didn't lie about what they saw, but they reported it through a lens of fear, not faith. They forgot God's power that had parted the Red Sea, provided manna from heaven, and brought water from a rock. They saw themselves as grasshoppers, and so they became grasshoppers in their own minds. The people's hearts sank. The initial excitement vanished, replaced by a wave of despair and terror. The sound of weeping filled the camp. They started to grumble against Moses and Aaron. If only we had died in Egypt, they cried, or in this wilderness. Why is the Lord bringing us to this land only to let us fall by the sword? They had come so far, only to turn back in their hearts at the final hurdle. Their fear had blinded them to the promise. In that moment of chaos, Joshua and Caleb stood up again. They tore their clothes in distress and pleaded with the people. The land we passed through and explored is exceedingly good. If the Lord is pleased with us, he will lead us into that land, a land flowing with milk and honey, and will give it to us. Only do not rebel against the Lord, and do not be afraid of the people of the land, because we will devour them. Their protection is gone, but the Lord is with us. Do not be afraid of them. Their perspective was completely different. They didn't deny the giants, but they declared their protection is gone. They saw the same obstacles, but focused on a different power source. The Lord is with us. For them, the giants weren't a reason to run. They were bread for them to devour. What a powerful image! The very thing that terrified the 10 spies was seen as nourishment by the 2 who had faith. This story isn't just about ancient history, it's about us today. We all stand at the edge of our own promised lands. It could be a new career, a relationship, a personal goal, or a calling from God. And just like the Israelites, we are often faced with a choice. We see the grapes, the potential, the blessing, the promise, but we also see the giants, the obstacles, the challenges, the fears, the things that make us feel like grasshoppers. The question is, which report will you believe? Will you listen to the 10 voices of doubt that focus on the size of your problems? Or will you listen to the 2 voices of faith that focus on the size of your God? The giants in your life might be real, but the God who is with you is greater. The challenges might be large, but the one who made the promise is faithful to complete it. Caleb's spirit is what we need. The Bible says he had a different spirit. A spirit that followed God wholeheartedly. It's a spirit that says, yes, the problem is big, but my God is bigger. It's a choice to see challenges not as roadblocks, but as opportunities for God to show his strength. It's about choosing faith over fear, promise over problems. So what are the giants in your life today? What walls seem too high to climb? I encourage you to look at them through the eyes of Joshua and Caleb. See them as bread. See them as a chance to trust God on a deeper level. Remember his past faithfulness. He has brought you this far, and he won't abandon you now. Don't let a grasshopper mentality keep you wandering in the wilderness when a promised land is waiting. Choose to believe the report of the Lord. It's a story about perspective, about fear, and about how what we choose to believe can completely shape our destiny. It's found in the book of Numbers, chapter 13, and it's a powerful lesson for all of us. Imagine this. You've been on a long, arduous journey. You've escaped a life of hardship, crossed a sea on dry ground, and survived in a barren wilderness, all sustained by miracles. Your destination? a promised land flowing with milk and honey, a place of rest, abundance, and freedom. The finish line is finally in sight. Your leader, Moses, selects 12 men, one from each tribe, to go on a special reconnaissance mission. Their job is simple: go into this land, see what it's like, and bring back a report. So these 12 spies venture out. They travel the length and breadth of this incredible land. They see its beauty, its fertility. The Bible tells us they found a cluster of grapes so massive it had to be carried on a pole between two men. Can you picture that? This wasn't just a nice place, it was supernatural in its abundance. They saw pomegranates and figs, confirming that everything they had been promised was true. The land was everything they had hoped for and more. After 40 days, they return to the camp, where millions of people are waiting anxiously. The excitement is palpable. They start their report, and at first, it's amazing. "Yes," they say, holding up the giant fruit, "the land truly does flow with milk and honey. Look at this evidence." The crowd must have erupted in cheers. The dream was real. The journey was almost over. But then the tone shifts. 10 of the 12 spies continue, and a word creeps into their report that changes everything. "But," they say, "but the people who live there are powerful, and the cities are fortified and very large." Their voices start to tremble. "We even saw giants there, the descendants of Anak." Suddenly the focus shifts from the promise of the land to the problems within it. The giant grapes are forgotten, overshadowed by the mention of giant people. This is where the story turns tragic. The 10 spies deliver their final devastating verdict in verse 33. "And there we saw the giants, and we were in our own sight as grasshoppers, and so we were in their sight." Let that sink in. We were in our own sight as grasshoppers. Their entire perception of reality was filtered through a lens of fear and inadequacy. They didn't just see giants. They saw themselves as tiny, insignificant insects, completely powerless and destined to be crushed. This is the core of the issue. Their problem wasn't the giants. It was their grasshopper mentality. They minimized their own identity and magnified the size of their obstacle. They forgot who they were, and more importantly, they forgot who was with them. They had a direct line to the God who had split the Red Sea, who had defeated the entire Egyptian army, and who had fed them with bread from heaven. Yet in that moment of fear, all of that history was erased. All they could see was their own smallness. Notice the progression. First, they saw themselves as grasshoppers. Then they projected that image onto their enemies. "And so we were in their sight." They assumed the giants saw them as weak and contemptible, just as they saw themselves. How could they possibly know what the giants were thinking? They didn't. Their fear created a narrative of defeat before a single battle was fought. They weren't defeated by the giants, they were defeated by their own self-perception. This report, this evil report, as the Bible calls it, was like a virus. It spread through the entire camp of Israel like wildfire. The Bible says the whole assembly raised their voices and wept aloud that night. Millions of people who had just been celebrating the proof of God's promise were now plunged into despair and terror. Their hope was extinguished by a report rooted in a grasshopper mentality. They cried out, "Why is the Lord bringing us to this land only to let us fall by the sword? It would have been better for us to go back to Egypt." Think about the tragedy of that statement. They were on the doorstep of their destiny, a life of freedom and blessing, and they wanted to go back to slavery. Why? Because the fear of the unknown giant felt more terrifying than the certainty of their past bondage. The giants in the land were a potential problem, but slavery in Egypt was a known reality. Fear made them prefer the familiar misery over the challenging promise. Only 2 of the spies, Joshua and Caleb, had a different spirit. They saw the same giants and the same fortified cities, but their perspective was completely different. They didn't see unconquerable obstacles. They saw an opportunity for God to show his strength. They said, "The land we passed through and explored is exceedingly good. If the Lord is pleased with us, he will lead us into that land and will give it to us. Only do not rebel against the Lord. And do not be afraid of the people of the land, because they will be our bread." They will be our bread. What a contrast. 10 spies said, "We are grasshoppers," meaning we will be their food. 2 spies said, "They will be our bread," meaning they will be our sustenance, our victory. It all came down to where they placed their focus. The 10 focused on the size of the giants. Joshua and Caleb focused on the size of their God. This ancient story speaks so loudly to us today. How many times do we face a giant in our lives? A challenge at work, a health issue, a financial struggle, a broken relationship, and immediately adopt a grasshopper mentality. We look at the size of the problem and feel small, weak, and insignificant. We start telling ourselves, "I can't do this, it's too big. I'm not smart enough, strong enough, or good enough." We see ourselves as grasshoppers. And just like the Israelites, we then project that view. We assume everyone else sees us as weak. We imagine failure. We create a narrative of defeat in our own minds, and that fear can paralyze us. It can make us want to retreat to our own Egypt, to a past that was comfortable, even if it was limiting. We miss out on the promised land that God has for us, a life of purpose, growth, and victory, because we are too afraid to face the giants that stand at the border. The lesson here is profound. The giants are real. The challenges are real. Joshua and Caleb didn't deny their existence, but our perspective determines our reality. We have a choice. We can focus on the giants and see ourselves as grasshoppers, or we can focus on the God who is bigger than any giant and see the giants as our bread. We can choose to be defined by our fears or by our faith. So the next time you feel that grasshopper mentality creeping in, remember this story. Remember the God who makes promises and has the power to fulfill them. Shift your focus from the size of your problem to the greatness of your provider. Do not let a bad report, whether from others or from the doubtful voice in your own head, rob you of your destiny. Choose faith over fear. Choose the giant-slaying mentality of Joshua and Caleb, not the grasshopper mentality of the 10 spies. Your promised land is waiting. Thank you so much for joining me today. I hope this story encourages you as much as it encourages me. If you found this message helpful, please give it a thumbs up and consider subscribing to the channel for more content like this. We'd love to have you as part of our community. Take care, and we'll see you in the next video.